Thank you everyone for joining this short online town hall meeting scheduled to present shortly the key outcomes of the IMO Facilitation Committee that we were participating in recently. Also reminding you all that this is going to be recorded, and the recording will be available also afterwards to be shared. We do recognize that this is an Easter week, and then we might have a lot of people already on vacation, so this will be available afterwards too. The FAL 50 meeting was a meeting that was maybe not very high on the list for us in the beginning, but if there's something on the agenda or any topics that you feel that we should have a closer look at, that or follow more closely, and any opinion you have regarding the work in IMO in this area, please let us know. Be in contact with Leo or with Daniel or with Mark. Cutting this short, I will give the word to Leo, who will guide you through what's going on and what this is all about. So Leo, please, over to you.
Thank you, Eero, and once again, good day to everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So today I will walk you through the key outcomes from FAL 50. As you can see in this slide, this is our agenda for today. We have a first part that is dedicated to the main outcomes, at least for CIMAC, when it comes to the session that took place last week in London. And so here I will focus on the maritime digitalization strategy, on the maritime autonomous surface ships, and cyber security. This focus, the focus here, as Eero has already anticipated a little bit, is really on the strategic direction coming out of FAL 50, rather than going into technical details. So I would like to start with showing you the agenda. This is the agenda that we have had on the table for the week. I have circled in red the agenda items that were of more interest for us, which I have mentioned earlier before. But as you can see, especially on Monday, we have had some amendments that were put forward and approved to the FAL convention. I will come back to it at the end, in the part that is dedicated to the other outcomes of the session. But as well, we have had the chance to discuss API and BRI data, as well as other stuff that you can see were condensed more on Wednesday, that might have been a little bit less relevant to us, and were more for the member states themselves. 3 working groups were going on in parallel. You can see them on the right hand side of this slide, and the one that were of interest to us were working group 2, that covered the topic of the comprehensive strategy on maritime digitalization, so agenda item 8, and then working group 3 that dealt with the mass that we at CIMAC are following very closely. So now, getting deeper into the first major outcome, or the first major topic, this was the IMO strategy on the maritime digitalization. As you might know, this is something that has been under development, or that the work started some time ago. Actually, on FAL 49, so last year, a correspondence group on indeed the IMO strategy on digitalization has been established, and it has been tasked to come up with, to draft the strategy, and also to think about the action plan and how to implement that. So this is one of the key outcome that is under continued development, and the work doesn't stop, but it continues. So first of all, we have had the report of the correspondence group and a little bit an overview. How does the strategy look like, the first draft after the work that has been done in the correspondence group? We as CIMAC, we have been participating in the activities of the correspondence group through our experts. So we have been contributed to the output that we have today. So to go a little bit shortly over it. So first of all, this is intended, the strategy, to be an IMO wide framework and not limited only to FAL. And we see more and more how digitalization becomes a horizontal topic that touches upon all committees. The strategy has a very strong focus on the interoperability, standardization, and secure exchange of data. And this is across the whole maritime ecosystem. It also takes a user-focused approach that aims to reduce administrative burden and improve efficiency for all the stakeholders involved, meaning from vessels to ports and to authorities. It is important to say here that the strategy remains high level and principle-based, so not getting into technical or prescriptive details, and that it stays technologically neutral. There is also a high emphasis on cyber security and resilience. As we see, this is a concerning theme that is coming up more and more, but I will be talking about in a moment. So what actually happened under this agenda item at FAL 50. So first of all, the discussion reiterated once again that this is a high level content, a high level output, and that it needs to stay within the IMO's remit, within its competencies, and this is something that has been really highlighted. We as CIMAC, when it comes to our contribution, we have insisted that when we talk about the strategy itself, and when we get into its content, that in parallel there is the need to decide and to specify how are certain concepts and how are certain terms being defined. For example, we have started the work and we have seen that there has been not only one definition of what digitalization actually is. And this is something that has been flagged, that has been picked up, and as the work continues, definition and terminology that are being used and that are present in the strategy will be reviewed again. And we are now waiting also for the other committees, competent committees that are involved in the strategy to give their input before this revision starts. Also, there is the recognition that digitalization might have its benefit on building on existing infrastructure. So this is something that has been said that would need to be embodied by the work that is going to be done. Having a little bit of a note that this doesn't mean having a preferential approach to anything that already exists, but to be very neutral on that. And also, there was the opportunity to discuss the so-called last mile, so the connection between the vessels and the shore, what is present in SOLAS Chapter therefore on radio communication. So to take into account also this part in the strategy. So the working group that took place during FAL 51 has finalized it, has proposed a draft strategy that is now to be approved by MSC, MEPC, and LEG. I have put at the bottom of this slide, for your convenience, a bit of a timeline how and when the strategy should be approved. So we have had now FAL 50. This is something that has been done. Work continues. But we are now waiting, as I have said, for the approval of the three committees. We are having the LEG committee coming up now in April, but this is a little bit soon to have it already on the agenda for approval. So actually the committee will put it as one of its agenda item for the meeting that will take place in 2027. But we are going to have this year, or it's scheduled, at least is foreseen, to have the approval of MST 111 and of MEPC 85. We expect to advance the work and to arrive next year in spring during FAL 51 with a proposal that will be put forward for the committee to be approved after taking into consideration what the other committees had to say, and then hopefully we will have the strategy approved by the assembly in 2027. But to see a little bit now what is still left to be done, and how will the work progress. We have now the work that will be continuing through the correspondence group. So the correspondence group, as I have said, has already been established. So from FAL 49 to this year's session, and a new correspondence group will be established, and we will be reaching out to you again to see if you're interested or who is interested to participate and to contribute on behalf of CIMAC, and thanks to and through our working groups. So what is on the in the terms of reference, what has been the correspondence group tasked to do? So first of all, to complete the action plan. If some of you have been have had the chance to have a look or to go through the strategy, so for the moment in the strategy it was written implementation plan, but this FAL session has actually decided to change the name from implementation into action plan. And here the aim is to identify the gaps in the IMO's working plan on maritime digitalization, and to see if there is the need to establish new work streams. This means that the gaps that have been identified will need to be addressed, and if any new work stream will be identified as necessary, this will need an approval before going forward with it. Also here, in this case, there will be the input coming from the three main committees, MSC, MEPC, and LEG. But one additional thing that the correspondence group will look at is whether it is possible to integrate this strategy in the overall IMO strategic plan for the 6-year period 2024-2029. And this is because seeing the importance, as I've said before, of digitalization and how spread it is across the committees, how horizontal. So the aim is here to see whether we can include it in, as I said, the IMO strategic plan. And the outcome of the correspondence group will be considered for approval at the next session in April 2027. Now, moving forward to the second major outcome, something that we have also followed closely, and that at CIMAC we tackle. This is the maritime cyber security. So what we see is actually a layered approach emerging at FAL 50. Like for digitalization, we see now that the topic of cyber is present a little bit everywhere. And particularly in this session of the FAL committee, it has been present in several agenda items. So this is just an overview for you to see where it was picked up. So at the regulatory level, there has been advancement. Actually, I will talk about it in a moment, on mandatory cybersecurity measures when we talk about the maritime single window. On a more strategic level, cybersecurity is embedded in the digitalization strategy that I have just talked about. It's actually one of its pillar. It can be considered as one. And then there is also an ongoing work on the guidelines that has been carried on at FAL 50 on the maritime cyber risk management. I will also touch upon them very soon, and maybe the biggest news that might come out from this session of the FAL committee, that there is a plan for a future framework when it comes to a non-mandatory maritime cyber code. Now, going back a little bit to the first point that I have mentioned when we talk about cybersecurity and FAL 50. So the first one is the mandatory measures for the maritime single window. So this might be considered as the most concrete outcome, as the working group has finalized the draft amendment to the FAL convention to introduce this mandatory measure with two important facets. The first one is that the approach is seen as a mandatory requirement, but member states are allowed to flexibility to see how we implement it and how to deal with it. And the second point is that the approach remains technologically neutral. So the amendments are now have been approved. They are ready to be circulated with a view for adoption at FAL 51 next year. When it comes to the strategy that we talked about earlier, here again to say the cybersecurity is one of its pillar, and when we and the strategy language treats cybersecurity as part of, first of all, data governance and trust, interoperability, network governance, and the rising topic of concern, resilience. So we see that cybersecurity is now really an integrated part of the operating model of the IMO, and this is not an isolated topic. It is not something that concerns only FAL, but is really transversal. And to conclude on this part, it is important to say that there was also strong recognition that the maritime single windows are becoming more and more, because of their nature, a critical infrastructure. And of course, vulnerabilities have the effect of a possible disruption of the entire supply chain. Now, the last part of the cybersecurity was the one that was dedicated to the guidelines and to the new maritime cyber code. So first of all, the guidelines is not something that has been done or concluded now at this session of the of FAL. It is something that has been circulated as a MSC FAL circular. So it's something that has been already out there that you might have had the chance already to see. But thanks to the work that has been done, it has been agreed that we do consider now this output closed. The guidelines will be now circulated once again, and since 2 documents has been submitted at this session as FAL 50 for consideration, this was a guideline input coming from the AIPH and FIATA. This will not be included directly in the guidelines, but they will be disseminated together for information. So for the moment, we have had a non-binding guidance, which were the guidelines, and we are now shifting to the realization of a non-mandatory code, which will give a more structured framework. But it's important to note that initially this will still remain non-mandatory, at least at the beginning. We move from the guidelines being a general principle or formulated as high-level principles and guidelines to be followed, to something that will go, so the code that will go more into details and that will have a system level approach. So now we are really in a situation where we have finalized the guidelines, and now we move into a new activity. The non-mandatory code, so will be objectives and goal based. It will require also a gradual capability build up across member states and the industry. And when it comes to its structure, as it usually happens also with other codes, the IMO will give the framework while the industry will provide the solution. This will be an exercise that will be a joint coordination exercise of FAL and MSC, given, of course, also the safety aspect when we talk about cyber security. And it has been decided that a correspondence group will be established, and it will be the correspondence group that will be the one working on drafting the code. Here again, I will be reaching out to you to see the interest from our membership and from our working groups in participating in the correspondence group. There has been also put forward an idea to have a dedicated working group on FAL 50, but no decision has been reached on that yet. This will be decided more closely to the next session. Above, I have put here a time. You see the timeline arrow, and this is a little bit how the code should develop. So we have been now we have done the first step, which was at FAL 50. So approving to start with this work. The correspondence group will now take over and will propose its first draft and its work. We'll present it actually at FAL 51, which will be followed by an intersessional group that will work on the code. And the intention is to have it presented for adoption in 2 sessions, so in spring 2028, before sending it for adoption to the MSC. So this is the work plan, and the work on this, the activities should start soon, and I will be coming back to you and inform you with more details. Now moving forward to our third topic. This is the topic of the maritime autonomous survey ship, the so-called MAS. So the main outcome probably here was not spectacular, of course. It was the biggest one, I would say, that is the approval of the revised FAL roadmap for mass, as the FAL 50 continued to follow a phased approach. So FAL is not yet introducing detailed requirements, as much will depend on what will be the outcome of the MSC 111 and the progress done there, as this is the committee that would expect to adopt the code, and it's happening this year in May. So this goes as well for the working group, for the FAL working group dedicated to math issues, that has been called upon to be established at FAL 51. This is the plan. It has not been decided yet, as we want to see what will be the progress at MSC. And also, it has been decided, this is something that has been discussed, that in order for the FAL committee to pick up future actions, those will be conditional on experience and concrete proposals to be submitted to the committee. So you see on the bottom left side, this is a little bit the timeline here. So we know that the code is expected to be approved in May this year. From that moment on, there will be an experience building phase that will start. We expect FAL 51 next year to assess the non-mandatory mass code and to consider the appropriate amendments to the FAL convention. What's needed to be done to adapt the code, to adapt the convention to the code, and then there will be, at least this is the plan for the moment, 2 more sessions, one during which the mandatory code will be assessed and the amendments to the FAL convention considered, knowing that the indicative scheduling for the mandatory adoption by MEC is foreseen in 2032 for the moment, and then there will be the last step for the amendments to the FAL convention, of course, will be after the adoption, and to see how to integrate this in the overall convention. So here again, not big outcomes, not big news, as the committee is really waiting on what is coming at what will be happening at the MSC. And now the last part of this presentation is just an overview of what are the other outcomes, what else has been decided at FAL. So we have had finalized draft amendments to the FAL convention when it comes to the exchange of API and BRI data, establishing a non-mandatory framework. So this is one thing. We have also now a new version of the IMO compendium has been approved, and this mostly implied additional data sets like meteorological and oceanographic data, seafarer related and SCCW certificate data. So new sets of data have been included in this version, which will be soon available. And last thing that I wanted to highlight here is that amendments to the convention when it comes to the topic of public health have been adopted with the entry into force, which is foreseen in 2028. So this would be the main outcomes that we have seen at FAL. We will keep on monitoring and seeing how things evolve. And as I have said, I will be coming back to our membership for our inclusion in the working groups that have been established at this session. And before giving back the floor to Eero, I would just like to inform you all, which is, I guess, something that will sparkle more attention and probably more interest. And this is our upcoming and the next town hall, which is the one that will be dedicated to the MEPC 84 and the intersessional working group on GHG that are taking place both in April, one after the other. And actually, first there is the intersessional, and then the MEPC 84, so the committee meeting, and after that we will be holding our town hall on May 8th. So you can save the date as usual from 1 to 2 p.m. And having said that, I thank you for your attention, and I give back the floor to Eero.
Thank you very much, Leo, for your good summary of that. I think that maybe the only thing left to be said that we announced earlier the town hall meetings for all of the major meetings that we have in IMO. But IMO is a little bit shifting currently the last meetings of the year. So MEPC, the extraordinary MEPC and MSC have all new dates. So please be tuned on to when we are releasing the new dates, and then when we got the final confirmations from IMO of the actual dates. So what's going to be happening in November and December. Other than that, I thank you so much for your attention today, and the only thing left to be said is that I hope that you have a wonderful Easter, and those of you who have the time to have some vacation, enjoy that. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.